Good morning, everybody. My name is Miuyin, and today I'll be diving into the topic of malware evasion. So, as we all know by now, malware remains a significant threat in our digital world, yet to this day, we still depend on malware analysts not only to understand the malicious capabilities that it has, but also to keep our defenses robust and up to date. So, unfortunately, the process of malware analysis is not straightforward. Modern malware employs sophisticated evasive techniques such as obfuscation, anti-sandbox, anti-disassembly, and anti-debugger that thwart the analysis efforts. So, despite the general belief that these evasion techniques are challenging, there is surprisingly no existing research that explores which of these techniques are currently problematic for analysts in practice, nor do we understand how analysts currently deal with them. So to fill this gap, our research focuses on answering the question, what evasive techniques are currently viewed as challenging by expert analysts and why? To answer this question, we conducted a comprehensive user study which allowed us to hear directly from the analysts themselves and uncover the specific pain points and workflows that they follow. For recruitment, we reached out to security organization mailing lists, malware analyst Slack channels, personal contacts, and utilized the snowballing technique to broaden our reach. To ensure the credibility of our participants, we asked them to complete a survey to validate their identity and experiences. From the survey responses, we invited 27 respondents that in the end, 24 participated in our hour-long semi-structured interviews, which focus on two primary areas. As I mentioned, understanding the challenging evasion techniques that they have in practice and the workflows that they use to analyze the evasive malware. So in total, we interviewed 24 malware analysts with an average of about 10 years of experience each, which spans across at least 15 different companies, including industry leaders like Mandiant, FireEye, IBM, and Proofpoint. Our participants also came from a diverse set of educational backgrounds. Although the majority mentioned that they studied computer science, others have specialized in areas like digital forensics and information assurance. Now that we've established the diverse expertise of our participants, let's now delve into the core findings of our studies. So we'll first explore the specific evasion techniques that were deemed as most challenging by in their daily workflows. By far, the most challenging evasion technique identified by our participants is obfuscation. So this technique significantly complicates the analyst process because it obscures the malware's logic and it makes it really difficult for the analyst to decipher the malware's true intent. But what amplifies the challenge even more is its prevalence in all types of malware. So as one of our analysts said, that obfuscation can show up in any kind of malware, JavaScript, PowerShell, Windows PEs, you name it, it'll be everywhere. The second most challenging technique identified by our participants is anti-disassembly. This technique hinders the functionality of the disassembler, which our participants heavily rely on. This challenging is highlighted by one of our participants as they said, alternative languages are becoming more problematic. Golang, Rust, Delphi are three languages that when you write a program and compile it, it is a lot less straightforward than looking at compiled C. So while these languages themselves may not purposely break the disassembler, participants pointed out the lack of effective solutions to disassemble these languages properly. The third most challenging technique is anti-debugger. This technique prevents the analyst from being able to debug the sample effectively. So one analyst expressed their frustration stating, if it's designed in a way that I can't even follow the code execution, that makes it really difficult to figure out which blocks I should narrow in on for static analysis, and it makes it really difficult to create signatures. The last technique that the participants stated is anti-sandbox. This observation can be explained by one of our participants who said, the anti-sandbox stuff, I could really just run on a real system, and the real system is still instrumented with a lot of these same tools. So now that we've explored which are the challenging evasion techniques that our participants face daily, we'll shift our focus to the second part of our user study results, which are the specific workflows that they follow. Through our discussion with analysts, we identified 3 distinct workflows. The first involves sequentially addressing each evasion technique to force the malware to execute. The second workflow focuses on selecting a specific part of the malware's functionality to execute it directly. And the third one is specifically designed to unpack the malicious payloads. So despite the differences that we found for all of these 3 workflows, they share a common approach, which is the fact that they combine various analysis techniques to effectively counter the multiple evasion techniques. For the sake of time, I'll briefly go over the second workflow, which aims to run a specific functionality of the malware. So based on the examples given by our participants, this functionality can be code that helps them bypass the evasion techniques, like a decryption algorithm, or it can really be code that analysts find suspicious or deem crucial for understanding the malware's logic and behavior. This particular workflow can be helpful since moving the start of the execution can help them bypass through several evasion techniques. The first optional step in the workflow is to run the sample until termination. This will help them see what behavior can be observed without any manual intervention. Once they're able to locate the code of interest, then they have to figure out what values or parameters they may need to execute, maybe needed to execute the functionality from this new location. Afterwards, they'll set the instruction pointer to the location that they identified in step B, and then based on the information gathered in step C, they'll make necessary changes. This workflow can be an iterative process until they reach their desired goals. Of course, the steps of this workflow, as you can imagine, can also be hindered by additional challenges, including evasion techniques that I had just mentioned. So what we believe is especially valuable about our research findings is that not only do we summarize the workflows that analysts use, but we also highlight the specific obstacles that analysts face at each step. And I do invite you all to go read the paper and explore these insights in detail. Okay, so that being said, here I have to be a bit honest, and I have to admit that we were genuinely surprised by what the analysts were telling us, because at this point in our minds, it seemed like the challenges that they were talking about were thoroughly researched in academic literature. But unfortunately, we can't do research based on our gut feelings, right? So we followed the scientific route and dug into the literature, where we found significant research on the topic. So the answer is yes. However, what we did not find was a comprehensive literature review or summary of the existing research that directly helps counter evasion techniques. So what did we do? We conducted a systematic mapping that specifically answers the question, which evasion techniques has the research community historically focused on? To conduct the systematic mapping, we followed the recommendations from Dr. Peterson and Dr. Kitchenham's on systematic mapping. We began our process with the first 2 authors manually searching for papers that tackle malware evasion techniques. This was done to identify keywords to generate our search query, which can be found in the paper, and to replicate this search. We then used the query to find papers in the largest data sets, such as IEEE, ACM, and Google Scholar. Then, to ensure the quality of the papers, we narrowed our scope to papers published in top-tier peer-reviewed conferences. After narrowing down our data set, the remaining papers underwent a meticulous manual review process. This process spanned several months, which involved applying inclusion criteria to the title and abstract, and an exclusion criteria to the full text. The main objective of this process was to ensure that each paper that proposed an approach that directly counters evasion techniques. So to then validate the quality of our search results, we conducted several rounds of tests, and in the end achieved a retrieval rate of 82.4. So after the entire thorough process that I just mentioned, we ended up with 45 research papers. Based on our findings, we find that obfuscation and anti-sandbox were the most researched evasion techniques with 19 papers each, followed by 7 papers on anti-debugging, and lastly, 2 papers on anti-disassembly. Great. So now we've answered which evasion techniques are currently challenging in practice, and also where has the research community focused on. So with these two findings, we decided to conduct a comparative analysis between the two. So as shown through our systematic mapping, and I mentioned, historical research has predominantly focused on anti-sandbox and obfuscation techniques. However, when we juxtapose these findings with the current challenges that are faced by analysts, we see a different set of problems emerging that future research should shift their attention towards. The main evasion technique that deserves more attention from the research community right now is anti-disassembly. So as shown in the graph, although the participants identified anti-disassembly as the second most challenging evasion technique, it has historically received the least emphasis in research. Another evasion technique that our analysis indicated still requires additional research efforts is obfuscation. So it remains the most challenging evasion technique for analysts, despite the community's extensive research efforts. Lastly, I want to highlight the success of the research community in addressing anti-sandbox in practice. So over the last years, we have seen much of the research success fully be implemented into the widely used commercial products. And through this study, we identified that this real-life impact has also largely contributed to the reason why analysts no longer find this evasion technique to be as challenging. So in the end, what can we learn from our research? So first, we found that our strategy of combining the results from a systematic mapping and the user study can help reveal critical topics that can guide future research directions. Specifically, we found that the research community needs to prioritize research on addressing anti-disassembly techniques. There's also an urgent need to identify and address barriers preventing the adoption of research, particularly in the obfuscation topic. But beyond the findings from our comparative analysis, the workflows that we identified can help the community design tools with human analysts in mind to help ease their current pain points. So my current research is actually leveraging these findings to develop a more interactive way of using symbolic and forced execution to help analysts locate and bypass evasion techniques. So if anyone is interested in this research direction, I'd be more than happy to chat about later. And then with that, I conclude my talk. Thank you very much.